Hi, everyone. Welcome to week three. There were a lot of really good questions this week, so thanks for including all these. So we have a lot of good stuff to talk about. If I don't answer your question here, I'll try to answer it like responding to the actual submission that you make. Um, Before we start, I was on the road the past 2 days, so I'm jumping into grading today on Wednesday, so that's why this video is so late, and I'm hoping to be able to get all of the problem set that we have for this week done early enough, either today or at some point tomorrow, so you guys can actually see what was going on. And if you have any further questions, ask me about that. But thankfully, you're not going to be drawing those graphs as part of the some of the answers for the exam itself. But you will have to have an understanding of the underlying theory that's going on and understand some of the relationships. So it is still important to know that. With that, let's just jump right into this. So a few people asked about the sort of age earnings profile, about why the age where earnings peak seem to be in the 50s rather than being later, especially since people aren't retiring as early now. Some of this, I think, might be a little bit of older data that people working, long hours, staying in their career through their 70s is something that's more of a recent phenomenon. Um, I think something that's really important here to remember is that it's not every single person having their income peak in their 50s. So for a lot of people that have standardized salaries for every year, we may not see this. It may just be the wages level off and stay the same for a long time. But there are a decent number of other professions where they work hourly. Maybe they get paid extra for overtime or extra projects that they do, or that earn commission on sales. So as people get into their 60s and into their 70s and these types of jobs, they will end up earning less because there's a sort of variable component to how much they actually make in a year. And something this really brings up, a few people have asked questions that kind of hint at this, is that there's an important question for economists, for those people with PhDs that stare at spreadsheets of data all day, but who's actually doing this? Sure, we could say that there's this trend and it happens here, but what's actually going on with the people? What specific people are doing that? And how is this changing? That's something that we don't answer a lot of questions. So there were several questions where I could say, well, we don't really know who does this. And I think that's a real shortcoming. And some of it is just there's so much good data nowadays that economists can spend their whole career just doing statistical analyses on this data and not actually ask the underlying question, what's going on in people's lives? This is one of the reasons why I enjoy teaching, is because whether it's undergraduates or graduate students like you guys have a ton of real world experience, which I think is really great because I get these questions that are just like, okay, but I'm trying to apply this to my life and I don't see that. Or I see some people that do the opposite. And it's really good to remember that these things are out there. I got another question about changes. The question specifically is, how do changes in military compensation packages, so things like base pay, housing allowances, reenlistment bonuses, how do these affect the decisions of soldiers to extend their service or to decide to pursue civilian careers? And how might these incentives influence the overall labor supply within the Army? So this gets at something really important. We're going to talk about some of this later in the course, but workers take a lot into account, not just simply looking at the wages. This is the easy way to look at this model so we can understand what's going on for the time being, just looking at wages, but soon we're going to include more. One thing is that people, at least speaking to the friends that I know that have served or still serve in the military, do this for more than just the money they're going to make. For some people, it is an opportunity to get their life on track. Just the sort of rigid requirements of daily military life can give people a lot of structure if they tend to lack that in their own lives. So I have seen that from some people, but there's a lot of other stuff. There's just, frankly, the mission of protecting the country is something that they find really important. So they get this sort of benefit from that as well. So it's important to remember there's these other sorts of things that factor into their decision-making process. So definitely changes in things like their pay, but other things like their housing allowances, their reenlistment bonuses. Something you didn't mention, but that I've done some work on, is military spouses' occupational licenses. So they're getting transferred from one base to another. Their spouse has to go with them, or hopefully goes with them to keep the family together. How easy is it for them to get a job once they relocate? Tons of all these little things that affect their decision. If you add up all these costs, it makes it more likely for an individual to leave the military because there's all these other things that makes their wages seem like they're less, or that factor in against their wages. A few people asked about how we structure unemployment or other sorts of government benefits, because we talked about some of the bad incentives that can be created when we don't design these with the disincentive to work in mind. That yeah, there are a few questions just asking about potentially better ways to do it. So someone asked about the question I want to pull up right now was someone asking about, does it make sense to pay welfare recipients more money if they're working so that we can incentivize productive behavior? There was some push back in the 90s. I think they called it work for welfare, that would encourage people to get jobs, or you had to be actively seeking a job in order to receive certain government benefits. The idea being that the government wanted people to do these good, productive things and then just kind of give this benefit as a temporary bridge until they're able to get back onto their feet and get a new job, because getting thrown out of a job, especially when it's unexpected, can really throw your life into a tailspin, and it takes time to get hired. So even if you have a job lined up, it could still take 2-3 months. 2-3 months without income is a lot for people, especially if they have a family. If it's one person by themselves, maybe not as big of a deal. Still a cost, but when you have family members, when you have children that are dependent on you, that changes things significantly. So trying to shift welfare from a permanent thing that you earn that disincentivizes work into sort of a bridge is something that was a big movement. And you still see that a lot today, that there are a lot of debates in the policy space about people trying to properly design these incentive programs. A few people asked about UBI and universal benefits, universal basic income as a sort of benefit for everyone. So it's universal. So if you're working, if you're earning a lot of money, if you're earning a little bit of money, if you're not working, you get the basic income. There have been some pilot programs for UBI on a small scale. It's really difficult to talk about the findings from these and really apply it to the real world. The big issue is that the payments, the UBI in these trials are very, very small amounts usually, because it's expensive to pay people a lot of money. And a lot of these programs don't have that sort of backing. Also, the program are temporary, and the participants know that they're temporary. So they're not making these permanent life decisions based on that. We can probably take some lessons from COVID. I know some people have written about that, but because of the economic and frankly the social disruption that went along with the pandemic, it can be difficult to apply those to more normal times. Michael Munger is an economist at, I'm blanking, I think Clemson, I forget, but he talks about UBI quite a bit and talks about the sort of the welfare cliff, where suddenly you remove all these welfare benefits at the same time, and people have this huge loss in income, even if they're getting a decent paying job. So he talks all about how UBI is a potential solution to try to redesign this. So he has a lot of interesting and very accessible talks about this if you're interested for your own personal this understanding of the topic. And then something that people asked about was the substitution effect versus the income effect. So something I want and need to do is figure out how to break this down even more so we can start from the beginning with what's going on. So for the time being, you can think of it this way, that there's some people out there, people have different preferences. Some people can live simply and they're happy making only a certain amount of money. Say they want to make $40,000 a year, because that's what it takes for them to have the apartment or the house that they want, to eat the foods that they want. You know, they don't want to jet set around the world traveling or buy the newest designer clothes or anything like that. They have a simple life that they want to live, and that's all it takes for them to be happy. So if they get a raise and they make more money per hour, that means they can work fewer hours to get that same exact quality of life. And that, because that's all they need, if they start earning more per hour, they will reduce the number of hours that they work, if that's at all possible. On the other hand, some people want to make more money when given the option between keeping the same amount of money or making more money, you get a higher hourly salary or hourly wages, they would prefer to earn even more money. So they may even increase how much they work. Now work is more valuable for them. And this can be especially true for people whose downtime isn't that particularly fun, that they're not getting this huge value out of leisure. You can imagine someone who lives in a beach town where the weather is perfect year round. They can just go out and relax, or they can go surf, they can go swim every day. For them, leisure is going to be really valuable. So they may be like that first person where they're happy only making a certain amount of money so that they can have a great, relaxing life. But other people really prefer the increase in consumption that they can get from making more money. So they're going to want to work even more. And if they start earning more per hour, that leisure now becomes more expensive for them. So instead of giving up just, a little bit of consumption to hang out and watch TV or to sit on the beach and read a book, they're now giving up even more because of this raise. So they're going to be less likely to take that downtime. And then I got a few questions about the sort of unemployment rate and labor force participation rate broken down by groups as we looked at that over time. There are a few questions asking me about women's labor force participation rate over time. Several different questions. Something I want to talk about just very briefly is thinking of, taking a wider view of costs that people face. Not everything is simply monetary. I mean, a cost for working is just a long commute. That's a lot of time that you give up. You can put a monetary cost on it of, the gas in your car and I guess the foregone income that you could have earned working a side hustle while you're driving. But really, there's a negative experience in driving a long commute. I used to have like a 45-minute commute in grad school for certain classes because we had two different campuses. I lived right by one, so I had very short commute to those classes, but then 45 minutes in the DC rush hour traffic. At WVU, I could get to the office in 5 minutes. Very little traffic when I went in the morning because of where I happened to live and the roads that I would take to get in there. Some people weren't so lucky in Morgantown, but that was much lower cost. It was much easier to get into work every day and home from work every day. But we can think of social norms as a cost. If it's, let's go back in time and it's considered bad, unacceptable, or just kind of looked down upon for women to work full time while they have a family. That it looks bad for the man that he's not able to support his wife, and for the woman, it's considered like negligence with children or something like that. In that world, for a woman to start working, that's a significant cost that she'll be facing just from her friends, her neighbors, other people in her family. That sort of judgment is a serious cost, and it would make women less likely to get jobs in that scenario. Likewise, we saw male unemployment was much, or I guess labor force participation rate was much higher back then because there was this social cost for them to not be working, that they were seen as a bad provider, or plenty of other negative things about them being lazy and choosing not to work. As these people age, even if those sort of social norms slowly break down over time and they change, they still kind of have those internalized. What we see as normal and as appropriate and acceptable from when we were younger continues with us even as things sort of change. I can even see that with myself now. I'm only 32, but as social norms start to change, I'm still used to what was considered acceptable when I grew up. There's something that a sociologist that I really like, Rob Henderson, talks about a couple times is men in female-dominated roles, that there's also a social cost for men who enter these sort of professions today. Men find those men that work in female-dominated jobs have worse romantic outcomes. There is a sort of judgment about the men that tend to work those jobs even today. So there is this sort of social cost, and that may be one of the reasons why men don't enter some of those professions at higher rates. Last thing I wanted to talk about was some questions about indifference curves. So some people were a little confused on them. I understand that because the textbook doesn't go in too much detail to breaking them down, and neither did I. Especially because of the questions that you had for the problem set this week. They had a formula for how to draw the individual's budget constraint or their budget lines. but we didn't have that for the indifference curves. Basically, what indifference curves are is it represents the trade-off between leisure and consumption. Actually, I'll share my screen real quick so that you guys can see this. There we go. There's some indifference curves up. So yeah, let's look at where it is. There we go. So for this example, this indifference curve right here labeled U star, this is the individual's indifference curve. It represents the trade-off between leisure, how much they enjoy leisure and want to engage in what we call leisure, and their consumption. These are the two choices that the workers are facing in the labor market or for their labor market decision. We draw this curve like this, kind of at a 45-degree angle because it's the simplest one to do. What we just want to do is highlight what the trade-offs are between consumption and leisure. It's going to be convex like this because we have the what we call diminishing marginal return. So here at this far end and this end up here, if you have a lot of consumption, just a little bit of leisure is more valuable for you. Likewise, if you have a lot of leisure, a little bit of consumption is more valuable for you at those extremes. And then it slowly tapers off and as we get towards, the middle of the indifference curve. It is possible for me to provide like information for you to graph specifically designed indifference curves. That's not what I wanted to do because that's way beyond anything we would do in this course. The basic idea is that in some cases you may have an indifference curve that's shaped like this a little bit differently. That's going to cross the budget line up here. You may have here we go, two different ones on the same graph. So you have one individual likes more consumption or it's tangent to the budget line up here, and one where the individual likes more leisure that's down here. So for the one question where I had you show one where the substitution effect dominates, one where the income effect dominates, there wasn't any specific way that you need to draw those indifference curves, just, sort of one up here that's kind of shallow and one down here that's kind of steep, just so you could see that for people with different preferences, they're going to react differently to a change in income. I don't, like I said, don't want to get too bogged down in these details. On the exam, you're not going to be drawing these graphs, but you will have to understand the relationship, be able to apply it to questions that I ask. If you have any more specific questions about the homework, once I'm finished grading it, I'll be more than happy to answer those questions for you. And we can have a conversation. You can either email me or you can set up like a Zoom conversation and we can chat. Yeah, like I said, I don't want to get too bogged down in these details, so don't get too upset about those or too worried about what's going on. If you can understand the concept behind it. So in a lot of math classes that I took in undergrad, we'd have these very, very detailed and complex problem sets we'd have to work on. And by working through those, we'd be able to understand anything we needed for the exam, which would end up being easier than that. So that's one of the things that I wanted to bring here, that in this more low stakes assignment where you had the ability to look through your book, to go through lectures again, to reach out to me for questions, work through the hardest stuff here so that you knew this model, maybe not inside and out, but you knew it pretty well. And then you could apply the basic relationships that hold for when we do the exam. So like I said, and you'll have a review sheet so you'll be able to see the general topics that we'll be talking about. I don't want to give you the exact questions, but at the same time, I want you to know what to study so you can feel comfortable with the exam. If you have questions with that or how we're going to be applying this stuff, please feel free to reach out to me and I can explain that to you. I've been going on for a long time here, so I think I will take this as an opportunity to end. And honestly, just thank you for the awesome questions I've been receiving the past 2 weeks. This is the first time I've tried this. There's a decent amount of work because there's 28 of you in this class, but I think it's really valuable to understand what you're thinking of, where you're coming from, and areas that we should talk about more. So thanks.